I belong to Rome in many ways, some that I like and some that I wish I could forget, but I won't. Um, the the point is, it's a good point in high school because I was in high school in Rome, and the school was quite strict, but not strict enough for me. I had been to British schools, so this was nothing new, but it was very strict for American boys who were there too. Uh, I think that Rome was very good to me in many ways because it introduced me to antiquity, which I was always interested in, but had never really experienced in Egypt. Because though there was Egyptian antiquity, I was never interested in Egypt in itself. I was more interested in Greece and certainly in Rome. So when I got to Rome, I was expecting to be in the land of Virgil. Actually, I ended up in the streets had all names of Virgil, but there was nothing remotely similar to anything Virgilian in the streets. So, in many ways, Rome was a big disappointment, and yet at the same time, it introduced me to Renaissance and Baroque Rome, which I'd never expected to love, but I fell in love with, and I'm still in love with until today. They were difficult, they were painful also. I think that I had a mother who was always quarreling with people. She was a very quarrelsome person, but beloved at the same time. And so it was difficult because suddenly I was exposed to her anger, and there was nobody that she could unleash her anger with except with me and my brother. So it made it very difficult. But that's only sort of a marginal aspect of our lives in Rome where we were poor. What I found myself interested in doing was that even though I had written many, many essays and articles on Rome in the past, the one subject that I avoided mentioning was how poor we were. I was ashamed of poverty because it was something new in our lives, but I had no means of conquering it, of dominating poverty. It was all around us, and we lived with it constantly. So I decided that maybe the thing that I needed to do was to discuss the poverty and what it was like for somebody who arrives in Rome expecting the very best and suddenly being confronted by a Rome that is extremely poor and not pleasant to be in, and where people spoke only Roman. And if you didn't understand Roman, as I didn't understand Roman, you were lost for a while. So there was a period of loss. And at the same time, though, my mother, who was a very quarrelsome person, found herself totally at home in Rome. She became friendly with everybody in the marketplace. People knew her. She was deaf, so that they called her La Sorda, but everything was fine. And my brother was the same way. He was also quite amicably inclined to meet people. I was solitary, and I became more and more solitary in order to avoid this time of Rome. It gave me access to a world that I needed another world, and that was the only world I knew to enter. And it was fabulous because suddenly I discovered, with my father's encouragement also, I discovered the classics. I loved the classics. And in many respects, going from one bookstore to another bookstore to another bookstore also allowed me to discover a Rome that I thought I would hate, and I didn't hate it because I loved old Rome and the bookstores and the streets and the people. Everything was wonderful, but I needed time to access that. Books, however, were my sort of out of this world of Via Clelia, which was not a pretty place. It is not, well, there are many ways in which it is not accurate to write about one's own past. One of the ways that for me was a challenge was I couldn't remember what someone said, for example, and a lot of people say a lot of things in my book. What I do remember is that there was an attitude and a particular emphasis on words that they use, which were cruel or kind or comical. And therefore, I wanted to capture that. And that required a lot of art, a lot of sort of artistic know-how, how to convey to someone's identity without necessarily being able to represent exactly what they said. Otherwise, the events in the books are all right, are all true. The problem is that I also wanted to tell them not to narrate a chronology of my life, but rather to use the novelistic conventions of the fictional conventions in order to give you a story that reads like a story as opposed to just a simple uh, tabulation of the facts, one after the other after the other. Not necessarily. I discovered, for example, that every character who was evil or who was comical or farcical, eventually I found that I wanted to rehabilitate them in many ways. And that was part of the something I didn't discover. For example, my uncle was a very cruel person, but suddenly I see him crying. And so I feel sorry for him. I want to help him. And at the same time, moments later, he will read a letter that is written by my father about him to us aloud to humiliate us. And so I hate him. I feel sorry for him. I hate him again. I feel sorry for him. He loves my mother, whom he hated at first. I find that the writing process allows me to salvage people who otherwise would have been condemned to basically perpetual hell, as far as I was concerned. But writing allows me to to find balance in human beings. And Mrs. Renato, who is completely a joke, at the same time is a very kind woman. And so she is taking care of my mother, who is very sick. And she leaves the house quietly so that my mother can sleep. These incidents, writing the memoir, allows me to see things that I wasn't able to see, at least before I started writing. Yes, they still do. Um, Put it this way, you said something that my point of view or my references change. I don't think they change. I think what happens is that they are distorted. In other words, when you go from one country to another country to another country and so on, you're, it's not that things change. You get more warped. You are more distorted by the fact that the one culture you thought was going to be yours because that's where it is, suddenly you abandon it and you go for another one and you abandon that one as well and you keep abandoning. And so yes, it seems to be a plus, a big plus. In fact, it's could be a very big minus. I don't consider myself lucky to have lived in so many countries and to have acquired maybe the citizenship of a country. But at the same time, I don't have a brand. I don't have a brand. I don't have a flag. I don't have a religion. I don't have anything. And I find that, yes, I envy people who have one nationality, one family, one thing, one this. I envy them. Do I want what they have? No. Okay, so am I happy with who I am? No. Uh, am I happy with anything? Absolutely not. So I am a sort of a composite of many things, but I don't think that the parts of that composite are actually congruent with one another. I want to go back to fiction. Definitely. No, I have nothing more to say about my life. My life is of no interest, even to me. What happened to me in America is uh, I have to look into it to find at least something that would signal that there's a big change coming up, a big removal of antiquity, and I'm moving into modernity or whatever. I'm not interested in that. I am interested in the person I was in Rome, um, and I'm interested in what happened to me in Rome that I feel I still have not resolved, and I will never resolve. In America, I think it's the same exact story that happened to me in Rome, things that basically perpetuate themselves and do not change. There is no story to tell. If I had a story, I would write it, but I don't have a story about America. I hope it keeps doing that. I have no problem with that. Um, I always, when I speak in public, I always find I'm speaking about the latest book, blah blah blah, and then when the public starts asking question, it is always about Call Me by Your Name. And what I find, which is truly amazing, is not only that there's an older generation of people who have read Call Me by Your Name and who love it, but there is also a very rising young generation. In other words, there's another new generation that were basically not able to read when I first published the book, and who now, 20 years later, are able to read and want to read it and pass it on to their friends. So yes, I love the fact that it's successful in that respect and that it touches people, and people tattoo certain sentences all over their bodies, and I say no, I don't want to do tattoos. I'm not going to sign my name, but they do it anyway. So the it is wonderful, but at the same time, it is something that I wrote so many years ago. 20 years ago, I wrote Call Me by Your Name. And so it's past for me. For me, it's like the next book and the next project. That's where my mind is always. And so I appreciate the fact that it has longevity, but at the same time, it doesn't really enter my mind any longer. It's not my child. No, it is. It's definitely this child is now in university. I don't speak. He doesn't call me. He doesn't speak to me, and that's exactly how it is. I have no link to it. I am the author, and I am speaking to it. And to be honest, when I teach a course on Hegel, for example, or on Kant, uh, I know my students who are all writing their dissertations, so they're doctoral students. I know what they're thinking. They're looking at me, I'm talking about Hegel, and they're thinking, he is the man who wrote The Scene of the Peach. Okay. So I know what they're thinking, and I cannot talk about my books to my students ever. I tend to like books that are analytical, and usually those, unfortunately, tend to be mostly French. But I will give you certain books that I think have been instrumental to me. One is the first book, I read it in Rome, and it really changed my perspective on many things, which is Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. Because, well, you don't want me to tell you why. I won't tell you why. Um, the second one is the book that I wrote my dissertation on, and it is my favorite novel, French novel. It is La Princesse de Clèves. I don't know if you know it, but it's a small novel, but it was the first modern novel in France, published in 1678, and has always been taught in school all the time since then. And it's a perfect story about a man and a woman who fall in love with each other but cannot speak to each other because there are certain inhibitions and conventions that prevent them from actually admitting their love to each other. And the fact of the inadmissible love is what I particularly love. The fact that you cannot speak your love. That is the second book that I can. The third book and it's another book by but I love it, and it is. I'm trying to think of what novel to recommend. In In fact, it's a book called Emma by Jane Austen. Uh, Again, you don't know what happens between the man and the woman because they don't even know that they're in love with each other. And yet the reader knows. And I love that. And finally, now, I would love to give you a Spanish novel if I can think of one. But I'm the only one that I know very well. And it's a classic because it has influenced Gogol's Dead Soul. It is Don Quixote. It is still an amazing book. How many people today read the whole book? I don't know. But it is a fantastic novel. It is certainly one of the 10 best novels ever written by in mankind. The other novel that you didn't say four, but I'll give you a fifth one, is because I discovered it very late in my life, was Fernando Pessoa, which is Portuguese, and the Book of Disquiet. I don't know what it's called in Spanish or in Portuguese. It is an amazing book.